What is going on, guys? I hope you're all well. Welcome back to yet another video. Today I'm going to be doing my full Hyperia review. Of course, this is a little bit later than I personally would have liked because of various other things we will get into. But as a whole, I wanted to kind of take a step down from kind of doing all these other videos to try and kind of talk about Hyperia in a little bit more detail than I've kind of been talking about in the past. I've got lots to discuss in today's video, and I'm going to be structuring it in a certain kind of way. The way in which this video is going to be structured, I'm going to first go through the organisation of the event and just how the ride is organised as a whole. Then I will be going into the scareability, so this is whether or not it's going to be a bit too scary for you, or whether or not, you know, it's going to be a bit too intense. Then I'm going to move into theming, which obviously is a big part of controversy around this ride, but I will be talking about that. And then, of course, we're going to go over the overall experience, just to kind of gather of what the ride is like as a whole. But yeah, if you do go on to enjoy the video, make sure to like and subscribe. I try to do weekly theme park related videos, so if you're an enthusiast out there, or if you're not, that's perfectly fine, and that sounds interesting to you, definitely hit the subscribe button. I've got some really cool videos coming up within the next few weeks. So yeah, without further ado, I think it's kind of time to get into our first category. Okay then, so like I just mentioned, the first category that I'm going to go through today is going to be organisation. Now this is something that I've praised many times in the past, but I did want to go into a little bit more detail about how the ride is kind of organised at the moment, as well as just kind of organisation as a whole. I won't spend too long on this. Obviously, you don't want to hear me waffle on about queue lines and all this sort of thing all video, because that'd just be boring. But yeah, so let's first start, I guess, with the kind of queue management system. Obviously, this is something that Thorpe Park announced way back a few weeks before Hyperia was due to be open fully. And this basically is probably one of the most organised ride openings I've ever experienced. The way in which they've kind of set up the queue lines is extremely understandable and extremely streamlined, and it did really make for quite an easy experience. There's no, as you see up on the screen here, the queue line was very organised. You kind of entered the queue just outside of the actual entrance to the park, moved down through into the Lost City, past the Tacotoria and down into the Soar Alive Plaza, or what used to be the Soar Alive Plaza. You then move a little bit closer to obviously Hyperia, and then you join the main queue line. Now this in kind of theory sounds really simple and doesn't sound too elaborate, but this one little change that Thorpe Park made here was absolutely phenomenal, and really did streamline the entire process. Obviously I can't do a Hyperia review without talking about what's happened over the last 3 weeks, because it's been a little bit of chaos. I think it's pretty fair to say. Obviously it opened on the Friday the 24th of May, to absolutely outstanding reviews by a lot of people. And then yeah, it all just kind of went downhill from there. I actually visited on the 25th, the Saturday. I couldn't do the Friday because I was going with my cousin, and obviously because of school times and stuff. So we were planning on going on the Saturday, and of course we got the news that it was going to be shut for that day. And then obviously we got the absolutely, well, I say we got there was about 3 different JPEGs that were uploaded to the Instagram profiles of Thorpe Park and the Twitter profiles, obviously just outlining that the ride was not going to be open for the foreseeable future. It was a really frustrating time, but you've got to remember this is a brand new ride, so it's going to have teething problems. You know, it's not really in Thorpe Park's hands to a certain degree, so it was kind of unwarranted seeing how much kind of disrespect was going towards the Thorpe Park staff. It's not needed, but yeah, obviously that was a very stressful time. I managed to get on it about a week or so after it was kind of dated to be open, and wow, what a ride it was. Obviously the organisation systems, like I've just mentioned, were absolutely fantastic. They just couldn't open the ride, which was really frustrating to see. But yeah, I'm not going to detail too much on that, because obviously a lot of that would be speculation, and we don't really know what was going on at this moment. But yeah, organisation overall, absolutely fantastic. I was really impressed. Okay then, so moving out of organisation now and start kind of talking a little bit about the scareability of this ride. Now the way I'm going to be judging the scareability is kind of a load of different factors. It's going to be how intense it is, you know, what I think could potentially scare people, because this is a Mack hypercoaster and it is just a lap bar. The height restraints are a lot shorter than most other rides. Most big roller coasters you see at Thorpe Park, Alton Towers, they're about 1.4 metres. I believe Hyperia is 1.2 or 1.3, so there will be able to be younger people that go on this ride, so you know, it's worth mentioning just because it might scare some younger guests a little bit, you never know. So I think the first kind of thing to mention, I would say probably, is how high this ride is. It is absolutely phenomenal. Of course, it is the tallest and the fastest roller coaster within the UK, and you really do feel that height when you're at the top. I will say it's not as impactful as if you kind of just were stood at the top of the ride. I do say this to quite a few people who are a bit scared to go on roller coasters, because you're moving when you're going up a lift hill. You don't really get a sense of scale and a sense of height, because obviously you're moving and you're going over the edge, whereas if you're kind of standing on top of the lift hill and you were looking down, you'd obviously get that feeling of vertigo come through a lot more prominently. However, you do get some absolutely fantastic views at the top, and of course if you are absolutely terrified of heights, then this probably isn't for you. As a whole, the ride itself is kind of weird to talk about, because it can be very intense at times, particularly that first drop as you kind of go down up into the Immelman. You do pick up a lot of speed. This is obviously the fastest roller coaster in the UK at the moment, sitting at 81 miles per hour, and obviously you do feel it. There is a lot of G-force that's hitting your body, and depending on where you're sitting on the train, that can have varying different effects. For example, you could sit at the back of the train, and of course you're going to feel the G-force a lot more because you're being dragged over those big drops and you're kind of being whipped around. Whereas if you're sitting towards the middle or towards the front, you might not feel it as much, but I would definitely say all around across every single seat, it does get quite intense upon kind of the first drop and a few of other elements within the ride. However, having said that, I will still say there are a lot of elements in here that aren't that intense, particularly the dive stall, as well as the kind of new element that Thorpe Park have implemented into this coaster, where you kind of outer bank and then come round, before you hit the splashdown. That is very, very I would argue it's more weightless than intense. It is a ride I would recommend to most people, plainly because it's a nice ride to try, to kind of see where you sit on the spectrum of how intense you like your rides, because I would say that it's not the most intense ride I've been on. Nemesis, particularly at Alton Towers, is very intense, the same with the Smiler, and it's definitely not on those levels because it is such a kind of big coaster and focused on weightlessness. You don't feel the intenseness as much, so I would actually kind of go as far to say on scareability, this is probably a nice ride to ease you into some of the more intense rides. If heights doesn't really affect you too much, you get those really nice pockets of airtime and really kind of graceful elements. There is a kind of little bit of intenseness sprinkled in every now and then, which I think is a really brilliant mix, and it definitely factors into how I feel about the overall experience, kind of leading up to this review that I've had with Hyperia. Okay then, so of course moving on to theming, this was kind of a main point of contention before the ride had kind of opened. I'm not going to sugarcoat it, the theming was very sparse. There isn't a lot to, you know, kind of theme it around. Obviously we have the lake, which I would say is probably the biggest kind of theming piece, if that's what you want to call it, and I would say that the ride as a whole is more stylised. It's not as focused on the theming side of things. Even in the initial plans that you can see here, there's not really a lot of theming on here. There's of course the lake kind of detailed as the main kind of part of the ride that's going to be kind of seen as theming, which I think they have conveyed very well. I think at the moment it's kind of hard to judge, plainly because the lake and the kind of surrounding foliage hasn't really grown through yet. Give it a few months to a year and I think it will look perfectly fine. But yeah, I would actually say, before I kind of negative the entire aspect of having theming on this ride, there are some really cool elements within the area and the station that do hint to the ride storyline. Of course, this is related to some of the stuff that Thorpe Park are posting and talking about before the ride opened, about kind of the rough story of Hyperia and how she forged her wings, then found her fearless. And I think the way they integrated the more stylised elements like Find Your Fearless with the kind of little bits of theming from the lore itself, I think was really well done. Don't go into expecting there to be no theming, because the station itself, I must say, is absolutely gorgeous. Like the dispatch effect you get, where you kind of have like the forge where the molten kind of goes into the wing mould, or it's really hard to kind of explain. but it is a really cool dispatch effect, and they have thought about this kind of thing. It's not like they've just chosen to not care about theming or any kind of thing like that at all. And that's not to say that we won't ever see theming for this. You've got to remember, when the Swarm first opened, the billboard weren't there. They added that afterwards. So there is a perfectly reasonable world in which we get some more Hyperia theming as the years go on. You know, it's really hard to tell at the moment, but I think as it stands, the way I experienced it, it really didn't affect my ride at all. Okay then, so with all that waffling out the way, let's get into kind of the overall experience and the conclusion to this review. Now, I will preface this by saying, like I said, I've been on it 6 times, so I think I've got a good feel for it, but obviously things are going to vary between who's experiencing a coaster, and I think that's a really important thing to take into account. However, I think the overall experience is absolutely phenomenal. I think this is probably one of the best coaster offerings we've got in the UK. It truly is world class. I mean, I was speaking to someone when I went a few weeks ago, just while I was at the park, just kind of, you know, striking up a conversation. He was kind of talking to me about, you know, what he's done abroad, and he'd done Velocicoaster and done all the stuff at Universal, and he said Hyperia was his second favourite ride of all time. Didn't beat number 1. He said his number 1 was Velocicoaster. But that kind of proves to you how much this is loved by a lot of people, and I think the overall package with the, you know, the stylised effect, the organised queue line, you know, the fantastic ride experience, I just think it's such a good package, particularly for Thorpe Park, who's been really missing something like this for the last, well, over a decade now. It's been a very long time since they've had a coaster. The soundtrack's brilliant. I've been blasting the soundtrack in my headphones for Christ knows how long. Like, genuinely, I think it's starting to get a bit of a problem now. I might be a bit insane, but it is a fantastic roller coaster all round, and I think Thorpe Park should be really proud of it, and I can't wait to ride it again. Here's to hope that, you know, they've kind of sorted out the, you know, the kinks that they've had with it. They've ironed out the problems, and hopefully it does remain open for the majority of the rest of the year now. But yeah, obviously, again, I will reiterate this: please don't send any hate to Thorpe Park if it does. They are really trying their best. When I went the other day and it broke down for like half an hour, the workers that were working the station looked really stressed. They are doing their absolute best to keep it running. They don't want it to close. So yeah, just bear that in mind if anything does happen in the future. But yeah, I'm going to stop waffling now, because, you know, I've probably taken a bit of time up out of your day. But thank you very much, you guys, for watching. I really appreciate it. I'm going to have another video out at the end of the week, hopefully, that's going to be on the topic that I'd quite like to discuss in a little bit more detail also. So definitely subscribe and stay tuned for that. But yeah, that is going to do it for today's video, guys. I hope you did enjoy it, and I will see you guys in the next one. See ya.